preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
And it is my great pleasure to introduce a dear friend and great educator, Dr. Thomas Sobol, who will give this evening the third Albert Hardy Newman Lecture. Before Tom speaks, let me say a few words about Albert Newman, who was my father. When he died, our family determined that a lectureship on subjects that would have interested him, given by men and women he would have enjoyed meeting and listening to, at a place that puts great value on intellectual endeavor, would be a most appropriate kind of memorial. Given this criteria, the 92nd Street Y is the perfect place, and Dr. Sobol is the perfect choice. I first met Tom Sobol when he came to Scarsdale as district superintendent in 1971. During his 16 years in Scarsdale, he distinguished himself by a special blend of intelligence and integrity, an ability to understand the interrelatedness of decision-making, and a management style that saw the advantages of bringing different constituencies together and using the best of the ideas that resulted. He appears frequently on television, has written countless articles, and has co-authored with his wife, Harriet Langsam Sobol, 2 books designed to help parents understand what goes on in the schools and to encourage them to work in partnership with the schools for their children's education. In the 4 years that he has been New York's Commissioner of Education, Dr. Sobol has not only gained national recognition as an educator, but has been asked to speak several times in England on issues of school reform. My father used to argue that no issue was more important to our country's future than the performance of its public schools, and was fascinated and frustrated by the tension between people's reluctance to break established patterns and the urgent need for society to change in order to survive. And because my father loathed jargon and pretension, he always welcomed the grace and the clarity and the honesty with which Tom presents his ideas. After Dr. Sobol speaks, there will be time for questions, and it is with great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Thomas Sobol.
Thank you, Nikki, for that excessively generous introduction. It's always becoming when a woman permits her generosity to outstrip her judgment in that way, isn't it? I have a formal text that I'm going to begin reading and talking from in a moment, but before I do that, there are so many of you out here tonight who are my good friends that it makes for a curious kind of occasion. On the one hand, I can look forward to a friendly reception, more or less, few exceptions, but more or less. On the other hand, if tonight doesn't go very well, this could be a real disaster for all of us, particularly because I have chosen deliberately not to give the kind of speech that I have become accustomed to giving recently to audiences on the topic of school reform. I intend to undertake something much more personal. And when I was coming down from Albany late this afternoon, I remembered something that happened to me when I was in the 4th grade, and Mr. Ruddy was my teacher up in Boston. Mr. Ruddy had us doing speech, and we had to write something and come before the class and say it aloud to the rest of the class. And we were told by Mr. Ruddy to use many colorful adjectives. Mr. Ruddy had never read Strunk and White. So I wrote this piece, which was about my father's flower garden and the way the light and the shadow played on it, and I used many, many flowery adjectives. And I was pretty proud of what I wrote, and Kate called on me, and it was time to go up there, and I took a look at those other guys sitting out there, and I knew there was no way that I was going to stand up and talk about the dappled light and shade on my father's flowers in front of them. So I made something up as I went along, which was very lame and went nowhere, to Mr. Ruddy's surprise and the amusement of my classmates. I had a temptation coming down tonight to try to get away with that again. To put, I'm serious, I really am serious about it. To throw this text over there where the briefcase went, and to give you my standard speech about education reform. But the last time I tried it, it didn't work so well. So I'm not going to do it tonight. You're going to get the whole shot, for better or worse. All right? So here we go. Good evening. Thank you, Nikki, for that excessively generous introduction. I feel the need to say something profoundly wise right here at the outset in order to deserve your kind words. Unfortunately, the only wisdom that occurs to me comes from the mouth of the great American philosopher Yogi Berra, who said on one memorable occasion, as you all know, "I'd like to thank everyone who made this evening necessary." The fact is that you are a most intimidating audience. I do speak frequently these days, and before most groups of people, I have no qualms about standing up and holding forth on the education issues of the day. But you're different. We're here, first of all, to honor the memory of a very special man on an evening created by his very special daughter with the help of her very special husband. You're all sophisticated people, accustomed on occasions like this to hearing speakers far more eloquent and accomplished than I. And most important, you are, as I said a minute ago, truly now, seriously, my friends, many of you, people on whose respect and affection I rely for my own sense of self-worth and psychic security. So in this situation, in this context with you this kind of night, Nikki and Harold, I can't make my standard speech. I can't tell you about the new compact for learning. I can't talk about the way in which changing times and conditions have passed our schools by, how obsolete we have become, about how fundamental change is needed in the ways we seek to organize learning if our children and grandchildren are to sustain the standard of living that we have known. I can't explain the need to help all kids acquire the skill and knowledge that they need to function effectively in this society. Skill and knowledge benchmarked to high international standards, the need to focus on results instead of on processes going through the traditional paces, the need to act on the knowledge that schools can't do it alone, and that you have to get everybody into the act, and that in the words of the old African proverb, it takes the whole village to raise a child. All of that is part of the outline of the speech that I might give on another occasion, but won't tonight. Nor can I go on to tell you how we propose to get those things done, about our current initiatives to set world-class standards and develop more effective ways of measuring progress toward them, to involve parents and teachers more fully in planning and decision-making at the school site, to offer incentives to schools and school districts to develop radically new ways to help students learn, and so on. But I can't do that tonight. Talk about that later, if you like. But what I want to try to talk about this evening is at once deeper and more risky. You are not about to hear a coherent, business-like address from the Commissioner of Education. Instead, you will hear from me a personal essay, reflections on a theme I know is true, but I'm still trying to find the words to express. This is an essay in process, and I invite your help tonight and later in thinking about it and giving it better shape and definition than I may be able to provide this evening. It begins this way. Something is missing from the current national debate about education. Let me say first, the debate is serious, rigorous, and useful. I truly think that we are on the threshold of a period of profound change in our system of schooling. Powerful forces have converged, changes in our demography, changes in family living, the advent of new learning technologies, a resurgence perhaps of free market economics, the needs of a business community grappling with global competition. And in this vortex, pertinent issues have been raised: equity in funding, multicultural education, parent choice of schools. Useful strategies have been suggested: teacher and parent empowerment, early childhood education, a longer and more purposeful school year. Powerful voices have been raised: the teacher unions, business leadership, the President of the United States, and our governors. But still, something is missing. And I've been trying to put my finger on it, but it's elusive, like the caress not given or the perfume not worn. I think I know what it is. It is the voice of the student, not the voice of the note taker or the test taker or the product of our system, but the human voice of the young human being deep in the quest for meaning. In the reports that we write, we in education, in the reports that we write and the plans that we make, students do many things. They go to class, do homework, take tests, get remediated, attain minimum competency, master the multiplicative inverse, and become part of the educated workforce. But they don't live. No one breathes in these reports and plans. No one ever sighs or gets sick or falls in love or moves across town. No one is frightened or embarrassed or driven by urges he or she cannot understand. And most especially, no one is confused and lonely as he or she tries to make sense of human existence. Where do I come from? Why am I here? What, if anything, is the meaning of all of this? The young people I have known in these many decades, especially those in adolescence, are more complex and searching than our specifications of desired learning outcomes and criterion referenced assessment programs would suggest. And don't, by the way, make the elitist mistake of thinking that only youngsters from upper middle class suburban homes are capable of depth of feeling. Virtually all young people, no matter how hard they may have to scramble, experience these pangs, unless their lives are emotionally stunted, and which of course is a different and very serious problem. Young people are messy, awkward, beautiful, irksome, loving, hateful, selfish, altruistic, and wonderfully consistently inconsistent. And their education has only marginally to do with irregular verbs and the binomial theorem. They seek and they learn the lessons of life, creating as best they can an identity and a place for themselves within what they understand of place and time. Now, I'm a teacher, as you know, and teachers, at least in our tradition, take the truth of experience and render it stale through exposition. We don't show, we tell. How many of you in your school days ever apprehended the Civil War as intensely as through Ken Burns' series on television last spring, for example? To approach truth more directly, we must forsake pedagogy and turn to art. And tonight, because I have been a sometime teacher of English, I turn to the art of literature. Over the years, I've read the writing and heard the speech of hundreds of young people straining to find meaning in their lives. Each of these statements has great poignance, but most tend to be too personal, too raw, too fragmentary for me to read on this occasion. And so I turn to writers, artists with words who can concentrate human experience and distill its essence. What is an American education all about, as shaped for us by some of our greatest writers? We could choose among many, of course, but because this is a personal essay, I shall choose three who have been important to me. I begin where modern American literature begins, and some would say ends, with Huckleberry Finn. Huck, you remember, has run away from home and is traveling down the Mississippi on a raft with Jim, the runaway slave. They share many adventures, they become close friends, but runaway slaves are illegal, and helping them to run away is illegal, and Huck's conscience begins to bother him badly. The more I studied about this, the more my conscience went to grinding me, and the more wicked and low down and ornery I got to feeling. And at last, when it hit me all of a sudden that here was the plain hand of Providence slapping me in the face and letting me know my wickedness was being watched all the time from up there in heaven, whilst I was stealing a poor old woman's nigger that hadn't done ever me no harm, and now was showing me there's one that's always on the lookout that ain't going to allow no such miserable things to go only just so fur and no further. I most dropped in my tracks. I was so scared. Well, I tried the best I could to kind of soften it up somehow for myself by saying, I was brung up wicked, so I weren't so much to blame. But something inside of me kept saying, there was a Sunday school, you could have gone to it. If you'd have done it, they'd have learnt you there are people that acts like I've been acting about that nigger, and they goes to everlasting fire. It made me shiver. And I about made up my mind to pray and see if I couldn't try to quit being the kind of boy I was and be better. So I kneeled down, but the words wouldn't come. Why wouldn't they? Weren't no use to try and hide it from him, not from me neither. I knowed very well why they wouldn't come. It was because my heart weren't right. It was because I weren't square. It was because I was playing double. I was letting on to give up sin, but away inside of me I was holding on to the biggest one of all. I was trying to make my mouth say I would do the right thing and the clean thing and go and write to that nigger's owner and tell where he was, but deep down in me I knowed it was a lie, and he knowed it. You can't pray a lie. I found that out. So I was full of trouble, full as I could be, and didn't know what to do. And at last I had an idea. And I took a piece of paper and a pencil, all glad and excited, and sat down and wrote, Miss Watson, your runaway nigger Jim is down here 2 miles below Pikesville, and Mr. Phelps has got him, and he will give him up for the reward if you send. Huck Finn. And I felt good, and all washed clean of sin. For the first time I had ever felt so in my life, and I knowed I could pray now. But I didn't do it straight off, but I laid the paper down and sat there thinking how good it was all this happened so, how near I came to being lost and going to hell. And I went on thinking, and I got to thinking over our trip down the river, and I see Jim before me all the time, in the day, in the nighttime, sometimes moonlight, sometimes storms, and we are floating along, talking and singing and laughing. But somehow I couldn't seem to strike no places to harden me against him, but only the other kind. I'd see him standing my watch on top of his'n, instead of calling me so I could go on sleeping. And I see how glad he was when I come back out of the fog, and when I come to him again in the swamp, up there where the feud was, and such like times. He would always call me honey and pet me and do everything he could think of for me, and how good he always was. And at last I struck the time I saved him by telling the men we had smallpox aboard, and he was so grateful and said I was the best friend old Jim ever had in the world and the only one he's got now. And then I looked around and I see that paper. It was a close place. I took it up, held it in my hand. I was a-trembling. Because I got to decide forever twixt 2 things, and I knowed it. I studied a minute, sort of holding my breath, and then I says to myself, all right then, I'll go to hell. And I tore it up. It was awful thoughts and awful words, but they was said. And I let them stay said. I never thought no more about reforming. I shoved the whole thing out of my head and said I would take up wickedness again, which was in my line, being brung up to it, and the other weren't. And for a starter, I would go to work and steal Jim out of slavery again. And if I could think up anything worse, I would do that too, because as long as I was in, and in it for good, I might as well go the whole hog. Wonderful passage, isn't it? By the way, if I can't carry the evening, maybe Mark Twain can, so that's all right. Huck learns many things as he goes down the river. He learns that people can be cruel, deceitful, vain, foolish, violent, hypocritical. He learns that love can come from unexpected sources. But nothing else, he learns, goes so deep into his being and tells him so much about himself and his society as when he says, "All right, I'll go to hell," knowing then and showing us that what the heart knows to be true transcends the morality of time and place and moves us toward the universal. Of course, Huck wouldn't use such highfalutin language. He was never much for book learning. In fact, when he feels something like school closing in, he says, "I reckon I got to light out for the territory ahead of the rest, because Aunt Sally, she's going to adopt me and civilize me, and I can't stand it. I've been there before." That's one American education. Huck never went to school, but Holden Caulfield did, many times, and many times dropped out. When J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye begins, 16-year-old Holden has just flunked out of Pensy Prep and, without his parents' knowledge, gone underground in New York City. Like Huck, he has many adventures and learns anew that people can be cruel, deceitful, vain, foolish, violent, and hypocritical. He is so vulnerable to the cruelty and hypocrisy of the world that he is close to a nervous breakdown. He has decided, ironically by the way, to hitchhike west, but he wants to see his little sister Phoebe once again, to say goodbye and to give her back some money that he borrowed. Her school was practically right near the museum, and she had to pass it on her way home for lunch anyway, so I knew she could meet me all right. Then I started walking up the stairs to the principal's office so I could give the note to somebody that would bring it to her in her classroom. I folded it about 10 times so nobody'd open it. You can't trust anybody in a goddamn school. But I knew they'd give it to her if I was her brother and all. While I was walking up the stairs, though, all of a sudden I thought I was going to puke again, only I didn't. I sat down for a second and then I felt better. But while I was sitting down, I saw something that drove me crazy. Somebody'd written, "Fuck you," on the wall. It damn near drove me crazy. I thought how Phoebe and all the little kids would see it, and how they'd wonder what the hell it meant. And then finally some dirty kid would tell them, cockeyed of course, what it meant and how they'd all think about it, maybe even worry about it for a couple of days. I kept wanting to kill whoever had written it. I figured it was some perverty bum that sneaked in the school late at night to take a leak or something and then wrote it on the wall. I kept picturing myself catching him at it and how I'd smash his head on the stone steps till he was good and goddamn dead and bloody. But I knew I wouldn't have the guts to do it. I knew that. And that made me even more depressed. I hardly even had the guts to rub it off the wall, if you want to know the truth. I was afraid some teacher would catch me rubbing it off and think that I'd written it. But I rubbed it out anyway, finally, and then I went on up to the principal's office. I went down by a different staircase, and I saw another "fuck you" on the wall. I tried to rub it off with my hand again, but this one was scratched on with a knife or something. It wouldn't come off. I tell you, it's hopeless anyway. If you had 1,000,000 years to do it in, you couldn't rub out even half the "fuck you" signs in the world. It's impossible. Original sin, the corruption of purity by sex, the reality and permanence of evil. All these occur to Holden as a "fuck you" sign scratched on a schoolhouse wall. But his education isn't over yet. Redemption is possible. Phoebe has come to meet him, dragging her suitcase. She wants to go west with him. He's abashed and horrified and tries to get her to go back to school. She won't. He yells at her. Okay, he lets her walk with him for a little bit, but she's mad now, and she won't come close to him or talk with him. After we left the bears, we left the zoo and crossed over this little street in the park, and then we went through one of those little tunnels that always smell from somebody's taking a leak. It was on the way to the carousel. Old Phoebe still wouldn't talk to me or anything, but she was sort of walking next to me now. I took a hold of the belt at the back of her coat just for the hell of it, but she wouldn't let me. She said, "Keep your hands to yourself if you don't mind." She was still sore at me, but not as sore as she was before. Anyway, we kept getting closer and closer to the carousel, and you could start to hear that nutty music it always plays. It was playing "Oh Marie." Played that same song about 50 years ago when I was a little kid. That's one nice thing about carousels. They always play the same songs. "I thought the carousel was closed in the wintertime," old Phoebe said. It was the first time she practically said anything. She probably forgot she was supposed to be sore at me. "Maybe because it's around Christmas," I said. She didn't say anything when I said that. She probably remembered she was supposed to be sore at me. "You want to go for a ride on it?" I said. I knew she probably did. When she was a tiny little kid, and Allie and DB and I used to go to the park with her, she was mad about the carousel. You couldn't get her off the goddamn thing. "I'm too big," she said. Thought she wasn't going to answer me, but she did. "No, you're not. Go on. I'll wait for you. Go on," I said. We were right there then. There were a few kids riding on it, mostly very little kids, and a few parents were waiting around outside, sitting on the benches and all. And what I did was I went up to the window where they sell the tickets, and I brought old Phoebe a ticket, and I gave it to her. She was standing right next to me. "Here," I said. "Wait a second. Take the rest of your dough, too." And I started giving her the rest of the dough she'd lent me. "You keep it for me," she said. And then she said right afterward, "Please." That's depressing when somebody says please to you. I mean, if it's Phoebe or somebody. I mean, that depressed the hell out of me. But I put the dough back in my pocket. "Aren't you going to ride too?" she asked me. She was looking at me sort of funny. You could tell she wasn't sore anymore. "Maybe I will the next time. I'll watch you," I said. "Got your ticket?" "Yes." Now, I'm about to finish the rest of the piece, but understand that Holden, these past months and weeks, and particularly on this long, depressing underground weekend, has not been able to establish one other decent, wholesome human contact. "Go ahead then. I'll be on this bench right over here. I'll watch you." I went over and sat down on this bench, and she went and got on the carousel. She walked all around it. I mean, she walked once all the way around it. And then she sat down on this big, brown, beat-up-looking old horse. And then the carousel started, and I watched her go around and around. There were only about 5 or 6 other kids in the ride, and the song on the carousel was playing "Smoke Gets in Your Eyes." It was playing very jazzy and funny. And all the kids kept trying to grab for the gold ring. And so was old Phoebe. And I was sort of afraid she'd fall off the goddamn horse, but I didn't say anything or do anything. The thing with kids is, if they want to grab for the gold ring, you got to let them do it and not say anything. If they fall off, they fall off. But it's bad if you say anything to them. When the ride was over, she got off her horse and came over to me. "You ride once too this time," she said. "No, I'll just watch you. I think I'll just watch," I said. I gave her some more of the dough. "Here, get some more tickets." She took the dough off me. "I'm not mad at you anymore," she said. "I know," I said. "Come on, hurry up. The thing's going to start again." Then all of a sudden, she gave me a kiss. And she held her hand out and said, "It's raining. It's starting to rain." "I know." Then what she did damn near killed me. She reached in my coat pocket and took out my red hunting hat and put it on my head. "Don't you want it?" I said. "You can wear it a while." "Okay. Hurry up, though, now. You're going to miss your ride. You won't get your own horse or anything." She kept hanging around, though. "Did you mean it, what you said? You're really not going away somewhere? You're really going home afterwards with me?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. I meant it, too. I wasn't lying to her. I really did go home afterwards. "Hurry up now," I said. "The thing's starting." She ran and bought her ticket and got back on the goddamn carousel just in time. Then she walked all the way around it till she got her own horse back. Then she got on it, she waved to me, and I waved back. Boy, it began to rain like a bastard. In buckets, I swear to God. All the parents and mothers and everybody went over and stood right under the roof of the carousel so they wouldn't get soaked to the skin or anything. But I stuck around on the bench for quite a while. I got pretty soaking wet, especially my neck and my pants. My hunting hat really gave me quite a lot of protection in a way, but I got soaked anyway. I didn't care, though. I felt so damn happy all of a sudden. I mean, the way old Phoebe kept going around and around, I was damn near bawling. I felt so damn happy, if you want to know the truth. I don't know why. It's just that she looked so damn nice, the way she kept going around and around in her blue coat and all. God, I wish you could have been there. God, I wish you could have been there. But even without God, there has been redemption from the cheapness of the world by innocent love. And that kind of redemption may not work for all of us. Holden is young, we're not, most of us. And we know that adult love is rarely innocent. But it does work sometimes. And is it not a glorious epiphany in a world of fuck you signs to know love has the power to transform? That's Holden's education. My third and last American education is from Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon. As you probably know, the novel tells the tale of Milkman Dead, son of a close and crafty landlord in a Midwestern town somewhere on Lake Superior, and grandson of the first Macon Dead, who came to Danville, Pennsylvania as a freed slave and successfully worked the land, only to be done in by white landowners who used their power and their superior knowledge of reading and writing to take the farm away. In fact, he's killed defending the farm. And in this passage, some old men down in Danville, whom Milkman meets when he returns there, recall what that Macon Dead, the original Macon Dead, meant to them. The more the old men talked, the more he heard about the only farm in the county that grew peaches, real peaches like they had in Georgia, the feasts they had when hunting was over, the pork kills in the winter, and the work, the back-breaking work of a going farm, the more he missed something in his life. They talked about digging a well, fashioning traps, felling trees, warming orchards with fire when spring weather was bad, breaking young horses, training dogs. And in it all was his own father, the second Macon Dead, their contemporary, who was strong as an ox, could ride bareback and barefoot, and who, they agreed, outran, outplowed, outshot, outpicked, outrode them all. He could not recognize that stern, greedy, unloving man in the boy they talked about. But he loved the boy they described and loved that boy's father, with his hip-roofed barn, his peach trees, and Sunday break-of-dawn fishing parties in a fish pond that was 2 acres wide. They talked on and on, using Milkman as the ignition that gunned their memories. The good times, the hard times, things that changed, things that stayed the same, and head and shoulders above all, it was the tall, magnificent Macon Dead, whose death, it seemed to him, was the beginning of their own dying, even though they were young boys at the time. Macon Dead was the farmer they wanted to be, the clever irrigator, the peach tree grower, the hog slaughterer, the wild turkey roaster, the man who could plow 40 in no time flat and sang like an angel while he did it. He had come out of nowhere, as ignorant as a hammer, and broke as a convict, with nothing but free papers, a Bible, and a pretty black-haired wife. And in 1 year, he'd leased 10 acres, and the next 10 more. 16 years later, he had one of the best farms in Montour County, a farm that colored their lives like a paintbrush and spoke to them like a sermon. You see, the farm said to them, see what you can do? Never mind you're born a slave. Never mind you lose your name. Never mind you can't tell one letter from another. Never mind your daddy dead. Never mind nothing. This here is what a man can do if he put his mind to it and his back in it. Stop sniveling, it said. Stop picking around the edges of the world. Take advantage. If you can't take advantage, take disadvantage. We live here, on this planet, in this nation, in this county, right here, nowhere else. We got a home in this rock, don't you see? Nobody's starving in my home, nobody crying in my home, and if I got a home, you got one too. Grab this land. Take it. Hold it, my brothers. Make it, my brothers. Shake it, squeeze it, turn it, twist it, beat it, kick it, kiss it, whip it, stomp it, dig it, plow it, seed it, reap it, rent it, buy it, sell it, own it, build it, multiply it, and pass it on. You hear me? Pass it on. But they shot the top of his head off and ate his fine Georgia peaches. And even as boys, these men began to die and were dying still. So Milkman returns to the scene of his father's youth, looking for lost gold, which he never finds. But in the process of his education, he discovers what it means to be a human in a family and what it has meant to be African American in America. And through the process, and though the process of discovery brings pain, in the end, it gives him wings to fly. Huck learns about the difference between respectability and morality. Holden learns the power of innocent love to redeem a phony world. Milkman learns how knowing the past can give us the insight and the heart to live fully in the present. These are valuable lessons, even if we don't measure them on the SATs. And surely they should be part of what a full education is about. There's more, of course, in those passages and in those works. There are the lessons that we learn and our students learn as we open our hearts and minds to Twain and Salinger and Morrison. Huckleberry Finn teaches us about a moral dilemma close to the bone of the American experience, the conflict between human goodness and established attitudes toward race. The Catcher in the Rye, 3/4 of a century later, sees similar conflict between appearances and morality, and in its pained revulsion at the hypocrisy and the cruelty it discerns, presages much that followed, I think, in the 1960s and 1970s. And the Song of Solomon, not yet 15 years old, gives bittersweet perspective on a world where too many blacks, one way or another, still die before their time. I sit on a lot of education panels and committees, and I'd like Huck and Holden and Milkman to join me on the next one. I am the teacher, so now it's back to exposition. Sorry about that. Most of us say we want to educate as well as to instruct. But my thesis this evening is that in much of the discussion about education reform these days, we don't sound that way. We talk about skills and knowledge and desired learning outcomes as if they were useful economic commodities, so many products we can acquire if we discipline ourselves. But we do not talk about the process of becoming fully human, of discovering who we are and what we might become. And because all too often we are here talking that way and students are there thinking the other, they write us off as hypocrites, or either they go along to get along or they tune us out entirely. Now, understand that I am a realist. I've just come today from Albany, where we are fighting the great mid-year budget wars of 1991. And I know the daunting problems faced by many of our schools, and that they will not be solved by paying more attention to issues of purpose and meaning. And I'll be happy to talk with you in a while, if you like, about threadbare budgets and inequitable funding and the often miserable conditions of teaching and learning and all the other problems we must solve if our children are to learn well. But if we're serious about reforming our schools, about restructuring them, to use the cant phrase of the day, I think it permissible, at least for a short space of time on one special evening, to talk about the problem of meaning as well. Is it too much to ask, in the end, that learning have some point beyond passing the course or getting the diploma or degree? Understand that there is no conflict whatever between the quest for meaning and academic rigor. I am not talking about relevance in some vague 1960s sense. I am talking about depth. Every subject in our curriculum presents opportunities to consider the moral dimension of experience. The study of computers raises questions about the invasion of privacy and about who has the right to control the lives of others. The study of science confronts us with difficult choices about genetic engineering, about the relationship between technology and the environment, about who should make such choices. The study of history helps us to understand the present moment more clearly, to recognize the forces acting on it, and to know that there are moral choices to be made, choices with consequences, because time present is inextricably connected to time past and time future. And we should be doing much more than we now do, at least in many places, to raise those issues, to help students see the connections among their studies, their feelings, and the world outside. But the power of the curriculum to help young people wrestle with the significant questions in their lives goes beyond its function as a springboard for the discussion of problems of that kind, moral problems of that kind. If the subjects we study are conceived fully in their intuitive and emotional, as well as their rational dimensions, and if the teacher has the skill to help students forge connections among subjects and relate them to their lives, the knowledge that is gained is itself the beginning of wisdom. The biology student dissects the frog, slitting the skin, removing the heart. No lecture is needed to reinforce the sense of the fragility of life, the delicate connection between the quick and the dead. The anthropology student stands in the Museum of Natural History and stares at the footprints of Lucy, ancient Australopithecine, and of her child, as they hurried together barefoot across the mudflat eons ago. And no lecture is needed to establish the fact of evolution, the essential sameness of human experience over geologic time. The math student sees the connection, grasps the inevitability of the curve, watches the pattern emerge from disorder. So this is how the human mind can work. So this is the connection between space and time. And when we leave mathematics and the natural and social sciences and turn to the humanities, the possibilities burgeon. This could be the topic of a whole other evening. Suffice it to say that for too many decades now, only the scientific way of perceiving reality has held sway to the detriment of other ways of knowing. That as fundamental to our culture as scientific inquiry surely is, philosophically as well as materially, and despite the undoubted blessings it has brought us, it discerns reality only through one lens. It does not explain why our oceans are polluted, why the Ethiopians starve, why the blacks in South Africa cry, why we display in our Holocaust exhibit in the State Museum in Albany every day a pictorial record of the most grisly evidence in our lifetime of the persistence of human iniquity. We need our science, but we know that there are other ways of seeing truth. We attend, in Maxine Green's phrase, we attend to the Bach fugue, the Chagall painting, the Styron novel, the Allen film, and directly and intuitively into the blood as well as the mind, there flows an understanding of the human condition that amounts to celebration, no matter how sad its terms. With good teachers, under reasonable conditions, all this is possible. We must make sure, however, that as we continue the business of school reform, and as we move from our jargon these days, from a process-driven to a results-driven system, we do not shortchange our students by defining the desired results in too mechanistic or limited a way. And I would submit that if we listen to our children's voices, we won't make that mistake. But there's one more thing, one last thing that we must do. I think that throughout our society, we need a more spacious view of life and learning. Forgive me for using the word. It's been appropriated by hucksters, I'm afraid. But it seems to me that we need a vision. That would be a whole other speech when you've been sitting here long enough. But I submit to you that one of the reasons for the malaise of our schools is that as a society, we have lost track of what we are educating our children for. Yes, we want them to read and write. Yes, we want them to fill the jobs the economy needs. Yes, we want them to know enough science and technology to hold off our global competitors. But what kind of life do we want them to lead? What kind of people do we want them to become? What kind of future do we want to inspire them to create? At present, the model of the good life that our society holds up to our young people is pretty shallow. Good life, on the television commercials anyway, the good life is one of self-indulgence, narcissism, consumerism. Keep what you've got, get what you can. And so the natural passion of youth has nowhere to go other than to an excess of selfishness. Young people need much more to be demanded of them. They need to be needed. They need to give. They need opportunities to show love, courage, sacrifice. They need to be part of a cause that is larger than the sum of their individual appetites. They need to believe in something, as perhaps do we. But I'm not the person to sound the trumpet for the next call to greatness. I am scarcely the Messiah. I'm not even John the Baptist. But people, I would tell you this, and I mean it very, very seriously, both as Commissioner of Education and as Tom Sobol. Improving schools with nothing more in mind than better test scores is an absolutely empty exercise. Thank you for your patience. Thank you. Well, I know that's not what you expected, but there we are. All right, now, will Cuomo run? Do you think if I really knew this is the place I would tell you? What's the next question? I can't see out there. Anybody have a question or a comment? A Barb? Yes? Remind us of what Goal 5 is, would you please?
Okay. Goal 5, well, in my speech, as I go on, you'll understand what.
Oh, it's a speech. Okay, go ahead. Well, yeah, speech.
I write very big, so it'll go very
I forgot to call for speeches, but that's all right. It's okay. You got the floor.
Commissioner Sobol and the public. First of all, I'm here representing the capably disabled in New York City and in New York State. I am representing all those employees within the New York City and New York State educational system who have a right and want to be employed. I'm also on the 504 Democratic Executive Committee in New York City, and I'm on the Governor's Advisory Committee to represent all learning disabled children and adults alike on Governor Cuomo's opportunity in every single way, including in educational systems, to be able to reach any level in any capacity, in any job, including the educational systems, even if it means going as far as an administrative job. Secondly, if part Goal 5 is a dream of deployment for the capably disabled in New York City or in New York State, this should not be a dream but a reality. The linkage between OBR investment in New York State in regard to employment of the disabled in the future does exist, whether or not many of you know it, and it's important because this is the future. In New York State, this exists for once children finish school and they're able to go out into the real big world, because that's what we hope that they will achieve someday. This exists. This is quote from Ask Me. This exists for
Right.
disabled people.
You're coming to an end now, aren't you? You're going to,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, I am. This also exists, which represents civil service. However, Mr. Sobol, if somebody were interested in becoming and working in any single educational facility, these laws are not being followed. For any child to see, just like any other minority has the right to see, examples that they can achieve their highest potential. For disabled children, this is not actually reality, because what those people like us have to do is to fight in order to maintain their jobs, or in most situations, and even this book says it, wind up
Right.
being fired.
Right. Let me ask you once again, would you tell us what Goal 5 is of the President's and Governor's national goals?
Okay, just give me a second. Goal 5 is concerned with lifelong learning and literacy. By the year 2000, every adult will be literate and possess the knowledge necessary to compete in a global economy and exercise the rights and responsibilities of citizenship. It also states in here that Goal 5 is also set, now should be, so that these two agencies vested,
Right.
which is New York State,
Yeah, I'd forgotten how long Goal 5 was.
and your educational systems, I guess, working together.
Okay.
And so my cousin are willing, and I've written you a letter, are willing to sit down with me and the unions that I have
Right.
already worked with, such as the UFT, which is greatly working along.
And make it easier for people who have some disability to serve as role models for other disabled children.
Exactly, and it doesn't
Right.
exist.
Thank you very much. That's about all the time we have this evening. No. Let me respond quickly. I think that everybody in the room, and I surely would agree with you, that it is highly desirable that children who labor under handicapping conditions of one kind or another see successful adults who have had to surmount the same handicaps functioning effectively as role models for them. Everybody's in agreement about that. There is no philosophic difference at all. All of the differences are practical, aren't they? Can you get the money that is needed? Can you change the buildings rapidly enough? Can you change the employment practices and so on? Now, you and I talked earlier outside, right? We did, right? Okay. And we made an agreement, or I tried to get you to make an agreement, that you were going to write to me, you were going to mark it personal, and I promised you I was going to get an answer to it. And if wait a minute, no, my turn now, you had your turn, my turn, and that then, if necessary, you and I are going to sit down and figure out more what those barriers are, and we're going to go to work on them. But let's not do our business in front of everybody else now that we've made the general point, because I think we all agree with you on the general point. Yes, sir.
Authoritarian and rigid, and it succeeded, in my day at least, in educating Italians, blacks, Jews, all people. And as my understanding is that it continues to do so, basically using the same kind of model. It's very authoritarian and rigid. And I was curious as to whether whether there's anything you bring to thinking about current issues where you believe that there is some role to play for what I would call, in order to avoid making a speech, the Latin school model.
Yeah. Let me address the premise first of all. First of all, a number of points. I'm very grateful for my experience there, as I judge you to be from the tone of your remarks. But let's remember that it didn't work for all kids. didn't work for all kids who attended the school, but it sure didn't work for all of the kids who started it and didn't graduate and the ones that never got there to begin with. When I entered the Boston Public Latin School in whenever it was, in the middle of 1943, I guess it was, there were approximately 600 students in my 7th grade class. And when we graduated in 1949, there were 203 of us. When we graduated from high school at about the middle of the century, we were approximately 1 of 2 who did so in those days. So, for openers, the school wasn't working for everybody. It was working for some portion of the population. Secondly, in my judgment, what good effects, and they were not universally good, but what good effects the Latin school had much less to do with authority and rigidity and much more to do with the ethos of the school created by the kids and the families from which they came and the teaching faculty. It was in the air in that school, as you will remember, that one studied, one worked hard, and one tried to learn. No matter how dumb it might have seemed at the time, some of the stuff, by the way, right? That was the source of it. As a matter of fact, I would put to you that much of the rigidity and authoritarianism got in the way of what could have been more productive and deeper learning experiences. Final point. While I don't want to plump for rigidity, which has a negative connotation, of course, nor authoritarianism in a democratic society, I do want to agree with you that there is a very great need throughout all of our schools for greater discipline. And I don't mean sit down, shut up, fold your hands, and do what the teacher tells you. I mean the kind of self-discipline that enables a person to take the task seriously, to have standards of quality, which it's important to uphold, to take pride in one's work, to be ashamed when it doesn't go well. That kind of, if that's what you mean by rigidity and authority, I agree 100%. And I think, by the way, that we're getting back to that. This country underwent a great transformation, as we all remember, back a couple of decades ago. And the oscillations on the pendulum are not rapid. It swings in a long, slow arc. But there are all kinds of signs in our schools of a rebirth of the kind of discipline of which I'm speaking. You have the last word in that because I don't want to give you offense. Anything else you want to say? Okay. Yeah.
It just seems to me that there are models available that
Sure there are.
have worked
Sure.
over the years, and I'm not an expert in education, but
Right.
I am very skeptical about the constant references to reform and reform and reform. I mean, there are models that
Well,
have worked, and it seems to me, just as a layperson,
Yep.
that some of these changes have proven to be very, very counterproductive and destructive. Let me just give you one example. There is any number of people who said at the time it was taking place that it's not analogous to what you've been talking about, but it's an example of what I mean about change that makes things worse. That school decentralization would become a patronage boondoggle. And it takes the establishment, the liberal establishment, takes 20 years to find out what people at that time were saying, that this thing was going to be a disaster, and now the only way to get around it is to work around it, and you can't, it's just too late.
Well, yes.
I think that the public, the taxpayers, let's put it that way, because I work for the state myself, and I understand the budget crisis, because I've also been involved, and I've also had to lay off employees. It's very, very painful, but the bottom line is the taxpayers are getting, I think, increasingly skeptical about some of the programs that well-intentioned people such as yourself have been talking about. And I need not mention just one example.
Well, I'll come back to that one, all right, but that's a different topic. Let me respond to what you said first, though, if I may. First of all, on the record, I did not initiate the decentralization plan in New York City, right? I mean, that happened back in the late 1960s. Secondly, isn't it curious that in the city of London, a comparably sized metropolis, it has been the very conservative Thatcher government which dismantled ILEA, the Inner London Education Authority, equivalent to our 110 Livingston Street, within the past 2 years, and broke it up into a set of smaller units because it was of such scale that it couldn't be managed well. So I'm not here to defend the abuses of power that have surely occurred under the decentralized scheme in New York City, but neither am I ready to say that the solution to that problem is to make one big oversized conglomerate either. Now, on the second point about there have been some pretty dippy ideas in education. Not only over the last 20 years, but over all of time. There have also been some very, very good ones. And one of the problems with our current system is that there is no systematic way to build on our successes. I could take you to places, I warrant you, I could take you to places here in the city and elsewhere around the state, not only in the suburbs, but in impoverished rural areas, small cities, and so on, where you would find pockets of excellence. Highly capable and committed teachers and principals doing good things with kids against great odds. But they're isolated. They flower all unseen in the desert, whatever that phrase is, right? There is no system, no effective system for disseminating the fruits of that success and replicating it elsewhere. Why would you be against that? One other question. Are you really suggesting to me tonight that because I have the temerity to talk about the possibility that an education might mean something, that that's a crazy liberal notion that we ought to dispel? No, okay. I just wanted to get that right. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. No, I have it on my night table. I haven't read it yet. I have skimmed it, and I've corresponded with him and he with me. And of course, I read the book reviews, but I would be faking it to try to do it. What do you have a?
You know what it's about, though.
Sure, it's about the.
On this tragic situation that exists in this country and in New York State.
I subscribe to that 100% and have said so again and again on the record. We have in the state of New York de facto as if 2 public school systems, one of which is largely urban, of color, poor, and failing. Exceptions, of course, but that's the dominant pattern. And another which is largely suburban, white, reasonably successful, got a ways to go. That's wrong. That's wrong. It is wrong that the average class size in New York City these days should be, at the elementary level, should be 29 or 30, and the average class size in the rest of New York State, all told, is 22 or 23. Why? Who said that New York City kids can learn okay in a group of 29 or 30, but it takes a smaller group of 22 or 23 for other kids to learn? Who said that? Where's that research? I haven't seen that. It is an inequitable system, and it, in my judgment, offends legality and morality to perpetuate it. Try to change it. That's something else.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah. We have no power over the money. We can recommend, and we do. We can lobby, and we do. We can try to shame people into things. We can try to plump them up. But I don't cut the checks. I don't make the laws. Yes, sir.
Since the teachers of tomorrow are in the colleges today, I was wondering if you would give us your opinion of Leonard Jeffries.
Next question. No, I'll do that. You know, when Mr. Jeffries' comments at the forum in Albany last July were published in the paper, whenever that was, this July or August, press started calling me right away. Before I'd seen the tape or read a transcript of what he said or anything, they just told me, this is what Jeffries said, what do you got to say to that? And I said that it seemed to me that those remarks were very unfortunate. And then the New York Post took off after that and said, unfortunate, is that the best you can say? What a wimpy commissioner we got here. Best you can say when somebody says, garbage like that is unfortunate. You know what the adjective was that the New York Times used yesterday in his editorial about Mr. Jeffries? That his behavior was unfortunate and the trustees at City College ought to get rid of him. I then, subsequently, when I'd had a chance to review the tapes, and watch Professor Jeffries' performance on that occasion, wrote a piece for the Times, submitted it to them. Wasn't badly written. I wrote it, but it wasn't badly written. It was okay. I mean, it wouldn't be rejected on that grounds, right? But they didn't print it. I shortened it, and it was published in Newsday, New York Newsday, back in August at some point or other, and I said in that, I don't have the text of it with me here, but I said that the comments that Mr. Jeffries is reported to have made at the event are an affront to civilized society, that his remarks about Jewish people shiver the spine, that his treatment of Diane Ravitch is juvenile and loutish, that his theory about ice people and sun people would be ludicrous if it were not the case that so many of his followers believed it. So that's what I think. But now I want to say something else to you. All right, I want to say something else to you. Leonard Jeffries, in my view, is an unfortunate manifestation of an extreme position. And his utterances can't be condoned. And we should speak out against them, as I've tried to do. But you have to understand something of the pain that a great many of us fellow citizens feel who are not extremists, who would not speak that way, but who feel not dealt with well by the mainstream American society, and who don't know how to give that effective voice. And I think it's right to take Jeffries on. I'm not sure what the CUNY trustees should have done. I don't want to get into that. I'm going to duck that question if you ask me. But I think it's right to speak out against him. It is wrong to call his, it is appropriate to call his remarks what they are, racist and bigoted and divisive and destructive and so on. You have to do that. But understand also just a little bit of the pain that many of the people for whom he's trying to give voice, though it's not effective, genuinely feel. I think in the whole debate, there is room for just a little bit more open-mindedness and charity toward one another than some of the press has encouraged. Okay? Yes, sir.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be in the room.
Irving, I didn't see you out there. How you doing?
Great pleasure. I would return to the text of the talk. I'm intrigued by the lessons that you wove together so wonderfully. But there is one that I'd like to hear you speak to.
Good.
Shows up in each of the three literary passages.
Right.
It appears to me that in each of those cases, cited, there was a tyranny of the school, the classroom, absolute tyranny, and an apparent loss of intimacy inside the classroom. Lots of other things have been said here tonight that I'd like to speak to and talk about, but I'm really interested in the tyranny of the classroom as a function of reform, as an artifact of our education system, and the absence of intimacy that seems to be so germane to the lessons that you wove together in the text. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that might manifest itself in general before reform?
Not as well as you can. I really mean that. I'm not being condescending or funny or cute. You've lived that more than I. You could do it better. I would say this. One of the unsung success stories of American education over the last 20 years or more, in my view, is the alternative school movement, all right? Where caring, capable teachers have gotten together with smaller groups of students under conditions which permit intimacy and created community which sustains people in their living and their learning. We have a great deal to learn from that experience, but we've tended not to act on it, not to replicate it, because we think it's offbeat, it's strange, it still smacks of the countercultural, maybe, although it's not become that at all. It's all that movement has long since been yuppified. May cost more money, we're afraid, and so on. But it's been a great success. When you think about some of the, I'm going to ramble a little, Irving, forgive me, but when you think about some of the great fortress-like comprehensive high schools in New York City with 4,000, 4,500, 5,000 kids, and you've been in one of those schools lately? Some of you attended them, right? But if you've been in one lately, you go into one of those schools any weekday morning or early afternoon, and I will tell you, you walk through that door if you can get through it, if it's not locked, and the guard doesn't grab you right away if there's a guard on duty, because he's supposed to be there if he isn't. You can feel the animal energy pulsating through that building, right? 5,000 adolescents penned in like that. I'll tell you what's in the air. What's in the air is sex, danger, excitement. I'll tell you what's not in the air. The binomial theorem. That's not in the air. Now, we know that it makes sense to break those units up. We know that it makes sense to break those units up so that no child is anonymous, that every child has a place, that when somebody is absent, somebody notices, that somebody cares about somebody. We know that it makes sense to keep those groups intact for a period of time, not just farm kids out to 6 or 7 teachers a day, and then another set of 6 or 7 new teachers the next year, but to keep people intact and move them together. And again, build community on intimate human scale that sustains living and learning. We know to do that, and that doesn't cost any more money, and you don't have to build any more buildings or hire any more teachers to do it. But we haven't replicated that kind of success. Huck Finn wouldn't have lasted, and neither would Holden, very long at Evander Childs these days, or Prospect. They might have made a good go of it at Middle College High School, or some others. If I start naming them, I'm going to get in trouble, so I better not do that. Irving, you really can give a better answer to that than I just did. You want to say something more about it?
Well, I like the question.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to see if I can capture the passion that you express about this issue of intimacy inside the classroom. Have you moved just a step further and talked about it in terms of public policy? It seems to me that that's the discussion. The discussion is how do we not necessarily replicate one or two excellent examples that exist in some flower garden someplace. How do we get persons like yourself to engage in the conversation about intimacy in the classroom in a way that has a possibility of lodging itself in public policy, and then maybe in somebody's budget, and then maybe in practice?
Well, we have carrots and sticks, don't we? The carrots are to provide incentive grants to conduct certain kinds of programs, and we try to do that in certain ways, though we don't have one for that kind of program right now. That's true. We can frame regulations as we're currently framing them in order to require the participation of parents and teachers in site-based planning and decision-making in all local individual schools across the state. We haven't gotten around to the point yet of drawing up regulations that govern the size of student groups and the number of teachers with whom they should interact, and so we haven't done that. But if you're talking about the mechanisms available to the state, the instrumentalities available to the state for effect... No, okay, then I'm missing the point.
You know, I'm really not talking about the mechanistic stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a fundamental problem.
Right.
I'm really talking about just the discussion.
Just getting the discussion going.
Getting the discussion going. How do we get the discussion going?
I suggest that the head of the Public Education Association in New York City organize a series of symposia on the topic. Who's that? Is you, man. I suggest that the PEA and this commissioner would be delighted to come out and be part of the party. Okay? I think we've got to get that going. Yes, sir.
To stay with your essay for tonight, the current demands that are being made upon you, as well as the rest of the educational establishment, are, as you indicated, results-oriented. Yet, it seems to me that the theory that you're trying to bring forward in this lecture and hopefully beyond is much more, if we have to choose between process and result, process-oriented, which is seemingly
I understand your point, and it's the kind of very smart, very clever point that I would expect distinguished counsel to make, but I demur. I'm not really talking about process. I'm talking about expanding the concept of results. So results are not just a set of academic skills or the kind of knowledge that is easily replicated on a multiple choice test, but the result is something internal that happens to people as a consequence of the process, whether you can measure it precisely or not. And I guess I haven't said that as clearly as I might, Roy, so you can help me do that. Go ahead.
A follow-up. I wouldn't disagree, because I think ultimately a good process will enhance results. But the sorts of results that are being talked of today are just those sorts of results that you alluded to earlier.
Right.
Results on the multiple choice and things
Right.
of that sort. How do you fight that?
By changing the assessment system, as we propose to do, so that we don't define de facto what counts as quality education as being that which is easily replicable on a paper and pencil multiple choice test. And we're about the process of doing that, as you know, and we will do it increasingly. Roy, I don't want to leave the implication that I'm putting down your comment. The fact is that your comment about process and result helps me think about this, and I told you all before, you're helping me with this tonight. I mean, I'm not there yet with it, so thank you for the comment. Last question or comment. Somebody over here. Yes, ma'am.
You talked in the beginning about feeling something is missing and
Yeah.
weren't able to articulate the voice of the student. And I'm a teacher, I'm an assistant principal. What I'm seeing here is we don't listen to the students.
Who doesn't?
We don't.
We don't.
The adults.
Yeah.
We don't teach them to listen to one another.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that too as the voice of the student is missing. It has something to do with the way in which we teach.
Yeah.
And the way we get up there, we know something, and it's the way we say it, and we think that if we say it well enough, then they will learn, without knowing the perspective of the student and what they're listening to. Sometimes we say, what did you listen to me say? It's amazing
Yeah.
what you will hear, but we don't say that often enough.
You know, it's a beautiful summary and a good point at which to end. You know, my schoolmate from Boston Land School made the absolutely unimpeachably correct point a while back that there have been some dippy ideas around, and he said it more gracefully, but there are some crazy ideas, have been some crazy ideas around in education. One crazy idea I think that some of us, I maybe, were guilty of back in the 1960s was to think that only students had anything worth saying. Remember that? You're too young to remember that. Somebody here is old. Who's old enough to remember that? Somebody in the room must be old enough to remember that, right? But I remember that, all right? Now that's dumb. That's dumb. As if we didn't know anything. As if our life's experience counted for nothing. As if all of those books that we read and those courses that we took are just irrelevant. That's not the case at all. But the problem is not to fly to the other extreme, which is your point, and ignore that voice. Go ahead, you finish.
Yeah, because I'm not talking about that other extreme.
I know you're not.
But even if you were to say in this room to the people sitting here, what did you listen to? That does intimacy you talked about. Of course, I'm not sure what you meant by intimacy. I know what was triggered in me when you said intimacy was developing the kind of intimacy in the classroom where students can really speak their private conversations, as Huck was speaking in Caulfield,
Mm-hmm.
and learn to listen to one another and share and listen to one another's perspectives, which is what multicultural education is all about. It's not another course.
Right.
It's about listening to the perspectives of other people and coming to some kind of way of coordinating action to make a better world.
Thank you for that elegant summary of much of what I've been trying to say. Look, we want the kids to do well academically. No question about that, right? Every one of us here wants that, and we want high standards and no exceptions, please. So that's a given. Right? That's a given. And we're not going to back away from that. We're going to intensify it. All I'm saying beyond that is we have other concerns as well. We do care. Whether you care about it from the schools or not, you care about it for your children and your grandchildren. You do care what kind of people they become. And we have some influence over that. And it's important that we pay attention to the quality of that as well as to the quality of the test scores. That's my only message. You're a very patient group. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.